Hey, and welcome back to another installment of Off the Beaten Path. Today we're traveling to just outside of Milwaukee to visit Derek Mance of MKE Drum Co. Over the past decade, Derek has made a name for himself in the world of repairing, restoring, detailing, and selling vintage drums. What began as a personal passion and projects of his own eventually grew into a business, and he now gets to share his love of working on drums to help others from all around. I was able to meet Derek for the first time last year at the Chicago Drum Show, and I was eager to come see the space he works out of, along with getting a peek at his vast collection of vintage drums. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that I'm creating new episodes in this series each month, so if you enjoy this content, I'd encourage you to subscribe to my channel so you'll be first to know when new episodes drop. So without any further delay, let's take a look at the workshop and studio of Derek Mance and MKE Drum Co.
Hello, how we doing?
Good, how you doing, Derek?
Pretty good, yourself?
Wonderful.
Come on in. This is where everything happens and doesn't happen, I don't know.
Yeah, very nice, and the first thing I notice is how organized everything is.
Oh, very organized. I'm very anal in that respect.
Yeah, well, and I think that's important for someone in your field when you're working with, drums have dozens, if not hundreds of parts in them. So keeping everything cataloged and organized is important.
Exactly, and being able to find things when I need them, when I'm doing different projects, or, just being able to find something at a moment's notice. Or even if, people find me and say, hey, do you have this one lug or this one, whatever part they might be looking for, I can easily find it and give them a yes or a no. Or
yeah, especially with vintage drums, because it's not like parts are interchangeable or people are very particular about wanting to use original parts down.
Exactly, even to the quality of the original vintage part, is
Sure.
it pitted or is it mint? Is it, everybody's looking for a different part and a different quality of part.
Well, before we get into going through the shop, I wanted to ask you two questions.
Sure.
One, how you got your start in drumming, and then two, your start with woodworking and kind of how those have come together now.
Sure. So I've been playing drums for over 30 years. I had to be 12 or 13 when I got a big interest in it. I think I started in 5th grade band on alto sax, and I did that for like a year, and I was like, this doesn't seem like me. And then, I started getting into music in middle school, and, drums kind of stuck out as like, okay, this is pretty sweet. And I had a couple buddies who were drummers and had been playing drums in band. So they kind of got me into some stuff. I took drum lessons for maybe a year, got up to, reading music and the rudiments. And then I kind of slacked off and was like, I don't want to perfect all these rudiments and that kind of things. I want to play the full kit and I want to rock out. So I had a full drum set at the time. It was like a wine red space percussion, it was pretty sweet. And then my neighbor growing up, he started taking guitar lessons. So when I was 13 or 14, we started a band just because we lived next door to each other. As far as like getting into this side of things with the restorations and repairs and refurbishments, my dad was a master carpenter for many years, and he was a construction foreman as well as had his own wood shop at home. So I just always grew up around power tools and woodworking and all that kind of stuff. 2009, 2010, I started getting into vintage drums, and I was like, hey, I could fix this and I could have a really good kit or a really good snare or whatever. So I was kind of getting into it for my own personal gain, like, oh, I could learn bearing edges. I could, I know how to use a router table, all that kind of stuff. A few years go by and drummer friends and people working at local shops would be like, why don't you offer this for people around the Midwest? There's nobody really in Milwaukee who does any sort of repairs like this. So I was like, okay, I'll make a logo, I'll make a name, I'll make some business cards, I'll make a website, and I'll just put my name out there and see, what happens. And that kind of opened some floodgates as far as people really had a need for, hey, like, this drum doesn't tune, can you redo the edges? Or like, I want to cut my power toms down to better sounding sizes and all that kind of stuff. So there was more of a need, I guess, than I thought there would be as far as putting my name out there. Being a graphic designer and a web developer, I'm on the computer a lot too, as far as doing that. So this is a really good way to come out, not be behind the computer, work with my hands, do something that, I really enjoy. And, to be able to save some of these old cool instruments from a dumpster, garbage, whatever, it's kind of like, a passion of mine that I feel great if I can help somebody fix a snare that was destined to be like, I hate this snare because I can't tune it. Well, let's take a look, let's see what we can do. Like 99% of the time, the issue can be resolved. So yeah, so that's kind of how drumming and, working on drums and doing this kind of thing all came together for me.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. I experienced this myself too, but like even being a musician, sometimes you don't get this tactile reward of progress along the way. It can be frustrating. So having
Sure.
something like woodworking or carpentry where you're putting things together physically, it's just a nice change of pace.
Exactly, and it's almost like, you can blast some tunes and kind of zone out. Like, okay, I got this whole kit that needs a refurb, so I got to strip lugs, and you can just kind of get in a zone. You can zen out a little bit if you want. So it's definitely, I love doing it.
Well, first thing I noticed when we walk in here is over here you've kind of got this wall of different shells or orphan drums.
Yeah, so this whole kind of section up here is just orphan drums, and it runs the gamut of, hey, I'm looking for a 16, floor tom to match my Ludwig kit, but I have the 13 and 22 shells. I want to rewrap everything. Do you have anything in the shell department that would fit that you're going to rewrap anyway? So it goes that to, there's bits and pieces for donor shells. If somebody had like, a vintage Ludwig kit and somebody put a big pearl mount on it or something, they're like, I don't want that on there and I want a virgin bass drum. If we have to patch those big gaping holes in the shell, there might be a matching shell, as far as the ply layup that I can make plugs out of. Because I try to at least bring the originality back to the shell itself as far as the different plies. I have a whole bunch of blank shells up there that were given to me by a friend that are old DW rep shells. So basically, when a DW rep would come in and say, hey, here's our new ply makeup, or here's this series, here's that series. They're all 14 shells, so my plan is at some point make a bunch of snares out of them. I've already made a couple. I got a bunch of wraps and scraps over to the right. There's a lot of original wraps over there from 50s, 60s, 70s that will match the original, because sometimes there's places that make wraps today that are trying to reproduce the original, but sometimes they're a little, there's a little inconsistencies, a little different things about them. So it's nice to have a little stock of matching wraps, especially like if vintage wraps, they get faded over time. I offer having all those on hand to at least match it as close as possible to try to conceal those holes.
Yeah, I think that's something I've learned with working on vintage drums, or really any drums in general, is the importance of knowing what to keep around long term. Like, there are certain parts that I wish I'd never thrown away thinking, oh, I'll never need this again.
I mean, you definitely learn, and it funnels it down to what you should keep around. I mean, that being said, there's definitely times where I'll get rid of something, and within the next month I go, I needed that,
Yeah.
That can happen with anything though. It's just the way it goes. This section, I just have like a little desk, but all my tension rods, nuts, bolts, grommets, badges, all that kind of stuff there. And then we get into bulk parts back here as far as snare wires, claws, tees. This is like a whole bin of just lugs, Ludwig classic lugs, some Slingerland mock style lugs, everything, just all on hand here. Tom mounts, legs, spurs, throws, butts, cymbal arms, old single tension stuff, big bucket of MIJ, made in Japan type stuff. So if someone's got a little kit that I'm repairing and needs something there, extra heads. I have some new ones in here. A lot of them are used because 9 times out of 10, if I'm doing, like, let's say I get a kit in or a snare that I'm just rehabbing to flip or to resell, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to put used heads on it, because when somebody buys a drum, I know I can speak from my experience. When I buy something, I'm going to put the heads of my choice on it because I want a certain top head, a certain bottom head, whether it's a snare or full kit. So anytime I do, restorations to sell, I always put gently used heads on there, because 9 times out of 10, like I said, they're going to take those, they're going to go in the garbage or get donated, and they're going to put the heads they want on it. I got some upcoming projects here on some vintage items. project I'm currently working on is it's actually an import kit from the, I think, 80s. It's an old ROC kit. So not a very expensive kit, but the customer, it is very sentimental to him. It was the first kit that he had that him and his dad purchased. So he wanted to go ahead and invest the money to refurb it because he wants, he's never going to sell it. It means a lot to him. So basically this project was prepping the shells, rewrapping them in some white pearl, redoing the bearing edges. So the bass drum is left yet. We just did some stained maple hoops to go with it. It's just a 12, 13, 16. It's got a really cool 8x14 snare. So that guy's almost done. So he's going to be really excited to get that back. Back over there is kind of like a tool area. I have like my router table. My true table I have is actually put away. It's kind of slid in there. It's actually a big sheet of what would be known as plate glass. They call it float glass now. Lots of guys, for a true table, to get the edges true before they route them, they'll use like a machined piece of quartz or granite because that's, perfectly level. If you can find a really good piece of plate glass, or like I said, they call it float glass now, it's the same thing, because basically the process is they pour liquid glass over like a sheet of metal, normally tin, and it basically self-levels itself because it's like water, So if you can find a really good thick piece of that works great as a true table as well, because you just want that, absolute plane, flat plane when you're truing that. This is kind of a winter project coming up. I always buy parts lots and everything, obviously, to kind of keep stuff on hand. Lots of vintage Ludwig hoops and other things that I got to sort through. I'll probably start to post more, because I do some buying and selling as far as snares and kits and stuff like that, but 80 to 85% of the stuff I do is just service-based. So it's not like I'm a, buy and sell drum shop. So gonna be going through that, some extra shells. But yeah, that's basically, in a nutshell, my little workshop world, if you want to call it that. But it's just nice to have a dedicated space like this, to be able to work on stuff like that. In our old residence, I worked out of a little cramped basement room plus the attached garage, and it was like, oh, we got to park a vehicle in there. Okay, put the router table away, get all the sawdust out of here. So we actually put this shop up, I think, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And it's been working great. Like it's kind of one of those things where you want something like that and you see it happening, and then when it's finally here, like, you want to do everything in your power to not take it for granted, because it was something you dreamed about for a long time. And now that you actually have a space like that, it's like, I love it, So I'm very grateful for it every day. I have a forced air heater up there, so I do keep this pretty well heated for when I'm working here in the winter. But like with things like, especially wraps in particular, I only tend to try to do those between spring and fall, because you want the right cure temperatures for like the contact cement. You want everything acclimated to the right temperature for it to cure properly. And a safety thing is just like the inhalation hazard of those fumes. So it's like, I can open up my shop doors and I can have a fan going. So usually when guys come to me with wrap jobs, I'll be like, either you can hold on to them, you can drop them off. We'll get to them between spring and fall. That, I got to be really just mindful of temperature, but otherwise the heater in here, and it's all fully insulated in here. So for doing edges, for doing, repairs, like hammering out dents, whatever you might need, any other sort of repair parts, it works great for. So, but yeah, like anything that maybe I refurbed and is for sale, any of my personal collection or stuff like that, that's all down in the basement studio area. So
cool. Well, can we go check out that?
We sure can. Right here, I just have a small room where I keep a lot of my extra stuff. So basically, like, this whole pile here is all stuff for sale, along with these couple kits, bass drum, another MIJ kit. But then I also have some other stuff I don't keep in my little studio room here, which is, I have one of my favorite little MIJ kits. That's mine. It's a Drum Mate, which I think is the coolest badge and name for, an import kit, and it's just in good shape. 12, 14, 20 with a snare. And then I have some drums that, if anybody has seen me at the drum show last year, which I am also going to be doing the Chicago Drum Show in 2024, I have, you know, some big bass drums I turn into some signage, as well as, you know, because my colors are black and orange, I try to find, if I find cool drums that are hand painted those same colors, I scoop them up. So like here's one, there's another one I found last year that's under there. Cool green and gold Duco WFL, a gold sparkle. I have a green Vistalite snare up there I bought from Bunny Carlos at like the first show that I went to, I think over a decade ago. Little Slingerland, the cool little cocktail kit there. This is a gold and blue, they're all marching drums that I turned into a giant kit that you would never want to really gig for, but we played a Milwaukee Day showcase and I was like, well, they're Brewers colors. So that was the only time I ever played at a show. It was awesome, but you don't want to continue like, you know, gig with something like that. This is a late 50s Compacto cocktail kit WFL. So it's actually 20 by 18 and this guy can lay down as well. This kit I'm gonna have up for sale soon. It's a 70s concert tom kit, but it's a Slingerland and what people call a root beer sparkle. Now Slingerland had a catalog black sparkle. And I think it's just one of those things, just like the Aqua Sparkle WFLs, that either some of the black sparkle faded, or in this case, if you pull off the lugs, there's no fade. So my guess is like how you can have inconsistencies between like paint lots or manufacturing lots or color, that it probably was a black sparkle run that was just more brown than black sparkle. So people adopted the name root beer sparkle. It's a manufacturing process. So it's like, hey, we ran out of X interior shell paint. Go down to Ace Hardware and see what off-white or white that they're blowing out for like fence paint or whatever. Yeah. Because there's lots of, you know, I'll do a lot of like mid-60s vintage Ludwig restorations where I'll be repainting the interior of the shell. And you know, some people are like, you got to match that exact shade. Well, there's probably more than one shade, you know, it's like they were, especially after 1964 and the Beatles and Ringo Starr, how Ludwig blew up and they were working 24/7 and all that. There is gonna be some times where they depleted their materials, paint, stock, and things are gonna, you know, they had to fulfill orders. Yeah. You know, and that's gonna happen in any manufacturing process when, you know, you're that busy. So that's kind of, you know, there are those oddities with vintage drums especially, where you'll see in between hardware and paint and wrap and all that kind of stuff. This is kind of my little tracking studio area. So it's kind of my practice space. I just finished remodeling this maybe a year and a half ago. So I'm just going down the whole recording wormhole as far as mics, and then using Logic Pro and learning all the production and post-production type stuff. So I've just kind of gotten there. So I have, you know, a smorgasbord of mics and my studio gear there. You know, I love 60s and 70s Japanese guitars. So your Taiskos and your Ks and all that kind of stuff. I don't know why, I just love how they look and love how they sound. Kind of a bigger Slingerland kit down here. It's a 24, 18, 16, 13. This was actually the first drum set I ever restored in probably 2010, if I had to guess. This kind of is what triggered everything else, because a friend of mine had these shells, found it from an old drummer who started the restoration, did a really poor job in starting the restoration. The stain was all drippy and like, so I basically resanded, redid everything, and it was my first big drum project. And so I just love them. The 24 sounds amazing if you want a bigger kick drum. They don't get as much time played as they should. Like, I don't usually play these larger sizes, but for something, if I'm doing a recording, you know, hopefully I'll have a good use to break those out soon. This is an original with the nice striped mahogany, and then I refinished this just to kind of go with this 60s 20. So there will be a 14 joining this probably over the winter. Then I have a whole shell bank of mid-60s Slingerland red sparkle. And these are the era where there is absolutely no grommets or badges on any of the toms. It was just what they were doing in 65, 66. there was a coating or a stain that they used in the interior of the 1960s Slingerland shells, which most people call a milk chocolate stain because it kind of looks like milk chocolatey. But what's cool about this era is it's all clear maple. There's no interior stain. So some of my favorite, so Slingerland is going to have a little bit different edge profile, a little bit more rounded over than like 60s Ludwig. So these have a little bit more attack and a little bit more thud to them, which I love. Just great sounding shells. So it's a 22, 20, 16, 14, 13, 12, and then I also have a matching 6.5 snare up there, and then a student model, which also matches the Slingerland cocktail kit that was out in the other storage room. Then my favorite finish of 60s Ludwigs is the Sky Blue Pearl. So I have a whole shell bank of that. I just picked up this canister throne where if you would sit on it, it would explode because the inside plies are just all water damaged. So that's for display only, but I got it for a really good deal, and it was from a dear friend who had passed away the other year. So that's kind of just display only. And then I have a whole mass of the Aqua Sparkle WFL. This is an all original with gut wires, calf heads, everything, a 10x14. So I have two 22 by 14s. Then I have a New Yorker size, which would be the 12 by 22. That's I believe a 17 tenor that I turned into a floor tom. Then a 16, a 13, a 12. That would be a 5.5 by 13 Porta-Pack model snare, plus the Ray McKinley. Those are my favorite snare drums tonally. I don't know if I'd ever gig with them, but in the studio, I just love how they sound. So those are probably the last snare drums I would sell if I sold the bulk of my collection. So as you can see, I have many in different wrap colors. So like I have the white marine pearl, the aqua sparkle, a faded silver, blue, a green sparkle, a black lacquer, a mahogany, and then there's a transition badge red sparkle there. And then we just have assorted Pioneer snare drums from Ludwig. So as you can tell, Ludwig and Slingerland are my favorites. Those two are kind of cool, the black lacquer and the green sparkle Pioneers, because they're transition badge, which means they only use that badge in 58, 59, late 58. So it's like a year and a half. And then they also have the really cool 3-point hex top strainer throws on them, which are very rare as well. A Ludwig and Ludwig from about 1912, 1914 that I found. It was all painted over and I had to source some parts. So that was like a cool little rehab of a really old drum. A couple of Superphonics, and this is the 50-year one. I think there was only like 300 made of those. This is a really early downbeat, as you can tell by the early version of the downbeat lugs, and like what they used to call like the beer tapper throw off. Your combo snare, which is a 3x13 in chipping green lacquer, which is pretty sweet. A couple 6.5 Zephyr lug from the 40s. Obviously that orange is not original, but like I said before, I like finding drums in black or orange just to match the Milwaukee drum colors. So I picked that one up. And then you get into some like Slingerland student models, a late 60s Supra standard size, 5.5, and Acro. The Acro is pretty cool because it is a transition snare, and the only reason I say that is because it's a 69 into 70. 70 they started using the blue and olive Ludwig badge on it. So it's cool because that still has a 60s Keystone badge, but it has the black face P85 throw on it, which is a 70s style throw. Obviously sounds like an Acro, which is fantastic, but kind of like a cool little extra about it. And then we get into some of my green and gold, Packer colors for here in Wisconsin, and then the black and gold. And then I have just an array of metal, brass, and aluminum Slingerland snares. So 6.5 and a few 5.5 Sound Kings, 6.5s, a cool 70s purple sparkle Slingerland. And then on the bottom, I just have a couple of cool MIJ snares and some assorted parade snares and tenor snares, just if you want, something big and ballady. A couple of cool 60s chrome timbales. And I wish I would use it for more than my headphone and kind of drum stand over there, but it's a beautiful gold sparkle Zephyr lug floor tom 16x16. My goal is it's too pretty to get rid of. And hopefully one day I'll find maybe a rack tom and a bass drum to go with it. So I'm hanging on to that one for a while. That's probably my favorite orphan that I own, and I only use it for a table. So I'm a more self-taught musical drummer than I am reading music or, knowing a lot of the technical side of drumming. But it was just so cool to actually be able to get a space like this to not only keep my collection clean and safe and be able to rotate and use all this stuff, but also to go down the music engineering and recording side of things. It's cool now that I can have a space to really go down that rabbit hole and learn that part of drums, which is just another facet of writing and playing music and recording drums and playing drums. Yet another space I do not take for granted because, like I said, I finished remodel down here about 1.5 years ago, and it's my happy place down here. So yeah, so that's basically the little studio area here.
Well, thank you so much for letting us come down here and take a look into your world and learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah.
If people want to reach out to you, MKE Drum Company.
Yes.
Also, MKE Drum Co. for those who aren't familiar with the abbreviation.
Yes, exactly. Either is acceptable. MKE is just the abbreviation for Milwaukee. So if you want to say MKE drums, if you want to say Milwaukee drums, I'll take both. I'm not picky. My website is mkedrumco.com. And off of there, I'll have anything I have up for sale, plus, a little sample of my services, contact info. You can email me directly at Derek, D-E-R-E-K, at mkedrumco.com. Also, just search up MKE Drum Co. on Instagram or Facebook. As well as if you ever plan to get out to the Chicago Drum Show in May, I have a booth there. I'm usually booth 87. So come say hi in person, drop me a line, and that's the best way to get a hold of me.
All right, well, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.